Hi, I'm Gordon from Camera Labs, and this is my first looks review of the Fujifilm X-T3, which debuts a new 26 megapixel APS-C sensor with phase detect autofocus across the entire frame, 4K video up to 60p with 10-bit internal recording, electronic bursts up to 30 frames per second, a detailed electronic viewfinder, and a tilting touchscreen, all packed into a compact retro-style body. Speaking of compact retro-style bodies, don't be alarmed, that's just me in my best vintage outfit for Goodwood Revival, a vintage car and bike festival where I got to shoot with a final production X-T3 all day long. By the way, that's an early version of the 200mm f2 lens I have there mounted on the camera. If you'd like to find out about all of the latest cameras with hands-on testing direct from these official events, please do subscribe to my channel using the icon in the corner. Right, now on with my review. The X-T3 debuts Fujifilm's X-Trans 4 sensor and X-Processor 4. The sensor may only boost the resolution by 2 megapixels over the previous generation, but now employs a back-illuminated design which should deliver lower noise, and the native sensitivity now also starts at a slightly lower 160 ISO. Fujifilm stuck with its unique X-Trans colour filter array and lack of low-pass filter for crisp results, and as before deploys its image processing using a selection of film simulations, which continue to deliver great results out of camera. The X-T3 gains the latest Eterna simulation, which made its debut on the X-H1 and works really well for video. Sadly though, there is no built-in stabilization on the X-T3, a feature that's still limited to the earlier X-H1 in Fujifilm's range. So if you're using lenses without optical stabilization, you're going to need to hold them steady as before. Fujifilm's monochrome and acros film simulations already delivered great looking black and white results, but the X-T3 now debuts a new monochrome adjustment to make the image warmer or cooler as preferred. It's like using different types of paper when you're printing in black and white. There's also the colour chrome feature of the GFX, which adjusts the gradation of highly saturated colours for greater tonal range. Like most higher-end mirrorless cameras, the X-T3 features a 3.69 million dot OLED viewfinder and provides a more detailed view than its predecessor, albeit with a fractionally smaller 0.75 times magnification, but that's still a large image though, and you really can't tell the difference between them. As before, the details considerately rotate to remain upright when composing in the portrait orientation, and the diopter wheel can now be locked. Thanks for that, Fujifilm. The X-T3 inherits the screen mechanism of the earlier X-T2, which can tilt up or down as usual, but uniquely also hinges on the right side for easier composing at low angles in the portrait orientation. Like the X-T2, it works quite well, although it still won't flip all the way forward to face the subject, which sadly rules it out as a serious vlogging option. At least the shooting information rotates to stay upright when the camera's turned, but I personally wish Fujifilm had deployed the X-T100 screen instead, which can flip all the way forwards. On the upside, the X-T3 screen finally gains touch sensitivity, making it easy to reposition the AF area and tap to pull focus on movies. Touch sensitivity also makes the superimposed Q menu much easier to navigate than on the X-T2, and a new night mode shows red text to help preserve night vision. The X-T3 also inherits the gesture controls introduced on the X-E3, allowing you to access customizable functions by swiping. For example, here a swipe right has been set to increase the font size for easier legibility, and a swipe right again switches it back. Meanwhile, a swipe left has been set to enable the new Sports Finder display, which captures a smaller 1.25 times cropped region, but lets you still see the entire frame so you can spot when a subject is approaching the cropped area, a bit like shooting with a rangefinder. I noticed the X-T3's touchscreen felt more sensitive than earlier models, which made swiping much easier, but it also meant my nose more often accidentally operated the screen too, so you may need to adjust the touch options. At first glance, the X-T3 shares much of the same classic styling as the earlier X-T2, but there are some important changes, including greater use of magnesium alloy in the shell. As before, most of the controls are on the upper right side, with a lockable shutter speed dial, free turning exposure compensation dial, and a threaded shutter release. Notice the metering collar under the shutter dial though is now taller, a feature inherited from the X-H1. It's the same story on the upper left side with the lockable ISO dial, but now with a raised drive mode collar. There's been some rearrangement of those drive modes, but this is still where you set the X-T3 into its movie mode. On the rear, the layout is the same as before, with a clickable thumb dial, an AF joystick and cross keys, although some of the buttons are now more tactile to push than before, and the cross keys certainly have more purchase than the X-T2. Behind the door on the left side, you'll find micro HDMI, USB-C, and both microphone and headphone jacks, the latter no longer forcing you to buy the optional battery grip as it did on the X-T2. You can charge over USB, and the HDMI impressively delivers 4K at up to 60p in 10-bit 422. The flap can also be removed entirely for easier access in a video cage. On the right side, you'll find twin SD card slots, both of which support UHS Class 2 speeds. Take that, Canon and Nikon. Above the card slot is the 2.5mm remote jack. The X-T3 is powered by the NP-W126S battery, and Fujifilm squeezed a few extra shots out of it with a CEPA rating of 390 frames. Fitting the new battery grip adds 2 more batteries to triple the total life beyond 1000 shots, but I feel battery life is something Fujifilm is falling a little behind on and needs to address, with Sony currently taking the lead of its current rivals. The new X-Trans 4 sensor boasts phase detect autofocus coverage across the entire frame, and you can use the cross keys, the AF joystick or touchscreen to set a single point. There's also zoning options as well as continuous AF custom settings first seen on the X-T2. You can set the AF system to operate on the standard 117-point array or a finer 425-point array, although behind the scenes there's actually 2.16 million phase detect pixels and operation down to -3 EV. Face and eye detection are also improved greatly, but in my tests so far remain slightly less confident than Sony, albeit a little better than Canon. Under the continuous high section of the drive menu, you'll see the X-T3 can now shoot at 11 frames per second with its mechanical shutter without the need for the optional grip, a nice upgrade over the X-T2. There's also a selection of electronic shutter options firing at 20 frames per second using the full frame, or between 10 and 30 frames per second with a 1.25 times crop. All will work with continuous autofocus, and you'll also find a bunch of shutter options including fully mechanical, fully electronic, or various combinations of the two. So how does it all add up in practice? Here's some bursts I took with the X-T3 at Goodwood with the XF100 to 400mm, proving the X-T3 can successfully track fast-moving subjects. In my tests so far, the autofocus felt much more responsive than X-Trans 3 models, and again can now operate across the entire frame. This is a camera you can really now use for serious action and sports photography in any of the drive modes, although as always there are some caveats if you're using the fully electronic option to access those higher frame rates. If you're panning quickly or shooting a subject that crosses the frame quickly while using the electronic shutter, you may notice some skewing. Here's a shot I took with a mechanical shutter, and now the same motion and shutter speed except using the electronic shutter. To be fair, the e-shutter readout on the X-T3 sensor is faster and less susceptible to rolling shutter than earlier generations, but swing the camera around and you will see skewing on the subject or on the background. New to the X-T3 is a pre-shot mode which uses the electronic shutter to maintain a rolling buffer of images as you keep the shutter release half pressed. When you fully depress the shutter, a bunch of these images are committed to memory as well as those following, allowing you to effectively capture the moments before and after you press the button. Here's a sequence I captured of fellow camera journalist John Devo, who I asked to jump the instant I pushed the shutter release all the way down. See how in the 20 frames per second mode I've captured a bunch of images prior to the jump. We've seen this feature before on Panasonic's cameras, but it remains really useful, particularly for capturing the moment a bird, or John here, takes flight. The X-T3 may boast a bunch of autofocus upgrades, but Fujifilm has also had some fun with the manual focus assistance, which in addition to peaking and split image options of previous models, now includes a new digital micro prism mode, which simulates the ground glass viewfinders of old film SLRs. I'm not sure I'd personally use it over peaking, but it's a fun option. For a company that once seemed to view video with some suspicion, the X-T3 has become one of the most capable movie cameras around. It'll film 4K UHD or DCI at 24 to 60p. Yes, 60p in camera. So far something only Panasonic has offered at this level. Switch the compression from H.264 to the thoroughly modern H.265, and not only do you get greater efficiency, but also 10-bit 420 internal recording. on a Fujifilm. There's also the choice of all intra or long GOP compression, 1080p at up to 120p for slower motion, 4K interframe noise reduction, and the flat F-log profile, again for internal recording, although personally speaking I'm perfectly happy using the Eternafilm simulation. Here's some 4K clips I've filmed with a final production X-T3. At 4K up to 30p you get to film with the entire sensor width, although set it to 4K 50 or 60p and there's a mild crop applied. Filming in 50 or 60p though gives you the chance to apply a 2x slowdown on a 25 or 30p timeline, or 2.5 times slowdown on 24p. You can see how I've used this on this sprinkler. Here's another example with race cars, first in normal speed and now slowed down by 2 times. You can continuously autofocus while filming, as I've done here while I approach this flower using the XF 18-55mm. And now, thanks to the touchscreen, you can tap to pull focus while filming, again here with the XF 18-55. As you can see, the focus pulling is still a little hesitant compared to Canon and Sony, but I'd say there's much less breathing once it settles on that target. If you're interested in grading, here's a clip I made in F-log, and you can download the original file from my X-T3 review at cameralabs.com, where you'll also find all of my sample images. Here's an example of 1080p at 100p for a 4x slowdown on my own 25p timeline here. In terms of rolling shutter, you will see some skewing, especially when swinging the body from left to right with a long lens as I've done here, but again it's par for the course and still an improvement over the X-Trans 3 models. The Fujifilm X-T3 may look a lot like the X-T2 from the outside, but in your hands it represents a significant upgrade. The new X-Trans 4 sensor may only offer a mild boost in resolution, but sports improved image quality as well as hugely enhanced autofocusing and movie capabilities. There's confident phase detection autofocus across the entire frame, and 4K video up to 60p and 10-bit internally. Seriously impressive features for a system which was not known for autofocus or video in earlier generations. Burst shooting has also improved with 11 frames per second mechanical, or up to 20 frames per second using the electronic shutter, boostable to 30 frames per second with a minor crop, and all work well with continuous autofocus. There's a fun pre-burst mode to capture moments before and after pushing the shutter, a more detailed viewfinder with a lockable diopter dial. The screen gains touch sensitivity, and you no longer need the optional grip for a headphone jack or 11 frames per second shooting. Remember, on the X-T2 you really didn't feel you were getting the most out of this camera performance-wise until you fitted that grip, and that's no longer the case on the X-T3. On the downside, Fujifilm has not managed to squeeze built-in stabilization into the small body of the X-T3, and vloggers will also be frustrated that the screen still doesn't face forward. Both of these are made more annoying by the fact the X-H1 and X-T100 resolved these respective issues in Fujifilm's range. Again, it would be hard to fit that stabilization into that smaller body, but really we could have had a screen that faced forward. I also feel the battery could do with an update, although at least Fujifilm's managed to squeeze a bit more life out of it. Overall though, the upgrades greatly improve what was already a highly compelling camera for both stills and video shooters. I personally loved shooting with the X-T2, and so far I'm enjoying the X-T3 even more. As always, if you find my videos useful, please like, share, and especially please do subscribe. And if you really like what I do, you can treat me to a coffee to help me get working on more reviews. There's a link just below the video if you'd like to treat me. If you're interested in my personal approach to photography, check out my book In Camera, which tells the story behind 100 of my favourite travel photos, all JPEGs, all straight out of camera with no post-processing. In fact, plenty of those taken with the Fujifilm system. And if you're interested in my personal work, you can find me on Instagram @CameraLabs. Thanks for watching and see you next time. Bye bye.